Welcome to the Sales Development Podcast, your trusted resource for the latest strategies, tactics, and tips on running a high-performance sales development program. Sales development has grown to become a critical part of the success of high-growth companies, and we dive in each week on how to specifically make your program successful and accelerate your career advancement. Subscribe at iTunes, YouTube, and jump on the newsletter over at Tenbound.com to make sure you never miss an episode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. I'm your host, David Delaney, joined today by Mr. Taylor Ryan, a partner over at Clint Marketing. Taylor, how you doing today, sir?
I am fantastic. It's getting towards the very end of the day. So, yeah, surprisingly enough, it's been a good day.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you for coming on the show. This is going to be interesting because Taylor is an expert in digital marketing and working with clients to increase their sales in regards to the funnel and all the different aspects that go into that. And I'm excited to, just introduce you to the audience and learn more about everything that goes into, digital marketing and how you can create interest, online. And you have a really interesting backstory as well. I mean, you are at the end of the day. So I'm in California. It's early morning. You're at the end of the day. Where are you, and how did you, go to start Clint Marketing and start this whole career that you have?
Yeah. So I've been in Copenhagen, Denmark for the last four and a half years, basically. I came out here to visit in, I guess it was summertime of 2015. I actually had a friend that was getting married in London. And so another buddy of mine was like, look, if you've already booked those tickets, it's about $30 to go round trip. Why don't you stop by here instead of spending your entire vacation in England? And so I only came for like a 3-day weekend. And it's this funny thing where they say, if you don't like beautiful cities, biking, and beautiful women, Copenhagen is not for you. And so, yeah, I got drawn in, man. It was just one of those like perfect kind of scenarios. And I also found out that, they get 5 weeks of paid vacation, no matter who you are, when you move here. So it's a work-life balance kind of chasm that you don't really see in the States. And it's been a crazy grind. I've actually worked as either the head of marketing or a CMO for the last 4.5 years at some of the fastest growing startups, but it's not without its own challenges. I've actually been fired 4 times in the last 4.5 years. So it's also been, a trying time. I think a lot of the Americanisms in me, and I would say a lot of, more of the, let's just say, blunt approach to marketing doesn't always mesh well with the European sensibilities.
Wow. Okay. I definitely want to dive in on that. What is the cultural, it sounds like there's a cultural difference in how you, go into it from an American perspective, and you butt heads a little bit.
Well, absolutely. I think especially if you break down some of that East Coast mindset. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., or just outside of it. The idea is you always want to do as much as possible before somebody either begs you to stop calling them, stop emailing them, or they're begrudgingly saying, look, you drive a hard bargain, but I'll sign this deal. So that to me is kind of what I've always been brought into, as either somebody that does growth hacking, which is kind of like the more methodical approach to marketing, or somebody that came from a background of doing some hard selling. Like I got my start as, I guess, like full-time career as a door-to-door window and siding salesman, at which case you sit in somebody's kitchen, you make the father, usually the dad, sit in the kid's seat, and you say, I'm going to sell some fucking windows until you throw me out of this house. And oddly enough, people would buy, but sometimes you have people that would be really upset with that idea. So like that hard-nosed selling was also what kind of built the foundations for how I go about marketing.
And so you would bring this kind of ethos to the companies over there, and they would just be like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So like just before GDPR, which is this whole crazy thing that isn't really even remotely close to any legislation in the States, California's kind of getting there. But basically, there's now a rule that says you cannot just blindly blast people with emails without having purpose and unsubscribe and all that. I was doing this this crazy kind of email blast stuff, and for lack of a better term, spamming people well before there was legislation against it. And so one of the companies that I was with, I basically scraped every employee's LinkedIn contacts, enriched the data, and then blasted these people basically looking like it was coming from one individual in-house. And I think we hit close to 40 or 50,000 people within the span of, I think it was like a week and a half, and we generated something like 1,000 plus leads, which turned into about 150 meetings, which resulted in the company hitting its last tranche, which then resulted in the company staying open and also getting another big infusion of capital. So like, say what you want as far as this stuff being less than savory or shady, whatever you want to call it. It's like, all right, well, like I fucking put numbers on the scoreboard. So like, what do you want to call that? And obviously that doesn't always gel well with everybody.
And what was their problem? They thought that you were just damaging the brand, or it just wasn't the way things are done, quote unquote.
Yeah.
What was the main issue?
So there's this really interesting phrase or classic belief system here in Denmark and much of Scandinavia. It's called jentelo. And it basically means don't stand out, don't make yourself different, don't do things that would put you in a different set of the group, which basically is kind of all of the razzle dazzle that is marketing, that is trying to find new and unique ways of closing deals. And so if that goes against most of your core principles, you're going to struggle. So yeah, there's definitely some differences there for sure.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that probably goes all the way back to, the origins of the culture, in that if you were outside of the group, if you didn't fit in with the group, then you would die, because you'd get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, right? If you were ostracized from the group. And it's just, I think it's like that a lot. But do you find that, the American culture somehow, it seems like there's a little bit more acceptance toward like going out of the herd and trying something?
Yeah. There's I can't remember the name of the publisher, but it was this neuroscientist that published basically a large number of CAT scans from the United States and found that there was a certain layout of the brain that seemed to be pretty common with the types of people that would leave everything behind, or crazy people basically. So you leave everything that you know behind as an immigrant and come to a new place that you've never seen before. In order to make it, you must be out of your mind. And we have a higher rate of those people. So it means we have more eccentric people in the US, which to me is great when you're trying to build a business, maybe not so much when you're trying to go through a mall without getting shot. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But yeah, this is the people that stuck kind of, to what they were doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, in some ways, economically and culturally and everything, it's incredibly difficult to be an immigrant, right? But that's just a given. But on the flip side, if you drop the baggage, and you drop all the, notions of your home country and you just come over here, it's like the personal baggage. It's got to be free, in some ways, that you can start over, and you could try something. And in Silicon Valley, a lot of the biggest companies are started by immigrants to the United States. It's amazing.
Very true. I think one of the interesting things is I do meet a fair amount of people that try to reinvent or have left somewhere. And, the thing that you can't escape is yourself. And so there is a lot of unfortunate circumstances where it's like, hey, look, your problems aren't left behind when you decide to up and move 3,000 or 6,000 miles away. And I think I've definitely come to terms with all of the interesting and crazy things that kind of run through one's mind. And if you've ever moved a great distance, it honestly is the weirdest part coming back. And I think that's like the secondary culture shock of like, oh shit, like this used to be like a whole different life, and this was what I thought was a nice place. And this is what I don't have anymore. And I miss that. And like all these little things that pop up.
So what do you think? Crazy. Are you going to come back or are you just going to stay over there? Or you haven't decided?
Man. No, I miss the US. I miss a lot of it. This is a country of 5.5 million people, which means the biggest businesses are shadowed, dwarfed by some of the pretty standard sized companies. If you look at the average ARR of most medium sized businesses out here, it's nothing compared to the US. And so, you kind of run through these mental loops of like, all right, well, why am I fighting tooth and nail for really basic contracts from companies that aren't really that amazing, that robust? But I know if I went back to DC, I'd have deals left, right, and center. And also people like to network, people like to wheel and deal. It's just, you have to remind yourself this isn't home,
Right.
and it's all gravy. It's part of kind of figuring out a new place.
Okay, so now, so you're butting heads with the folks if you're trying to go in-house. So did you start your own agency, or did you start with a group of people? How did Clint Marketing, get going?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people get into certain careers because they see somebody that is doing what they always looked upon amorously or thought was like a really cool gig, and they realize that like this person sucks. It's always like there's that phrase, never meet your heroes, because you'll always be disappointed.
Yes.
So
I've had that experience. Yeah.
Really? Well, no, I'd love to hear yours before I go on to this. Like, I'm curious what your experience was.
God. Well, okay. Well, it's a guy who I admired, online. He's like an online guru. And then, when I met him, he was signing books, and, he had probably, I gotta, give the guy props. Like, he probably had signed about 1,000 books that day. And finally, when I came up to him, he was just completely blank, and I thought that there would be some kind of personality there, or at least some kind of acknowledgement, that I was a fan. And I now that I even think about it, it's like gotta be empathetic to the guy, because he was probably just completely burnt. But it's true. I mean, it's like you build somebody up, you just maybe just like a smile or a thank you or something like that. But this guy was completely blank when I finally met him. So
interesting. Yeah. I've had varieties of that. I think mine was a bit more of like, I recognize that like this person has the career that I have always kind of sought after. And then you see this person take the stage and riff, playing Kenny G jazz over here, basically not really prepared, hadn't put any time or effort into a speech, just like, well, what's in the news? Like, you're not fucking Jay Leno. You don't have a team of writers behind you, and you didn't try to do anything other than waste the audience members' time. And to me, like, that was absurd. Like, if there's 50 people in a room and your speech is half an hour, you've wasted like 24 hours of collective time. So I was looking at this and I'm like, I can do better than that guy. That guy's a dick. So I would basically start reaching out to these. Can I curse, by the way? I'm doing a lot of it already. I hope that's okay, cool.
That's encouraged.
So like I ended up meeting with a couple of the event organizers, and I'm sure you've done it because I know you're running a ton of events, but like the first time that I got on stage in a really long time, it was a kick of adrenaline. And it's, like, I'm not going to jump out of fucking airplanes. Like, that's crazy. I'm not doing MMA. Like, I'm ugly enough as is. Don't need to do that. So, like, this is my adrenaline rush, is getting a chance to kind of play on stage. And so after I'd finished going over something that I learned and marketing or a new tactic in sales, I would have people come up to me and ask me, hey, do you have any room to work on my project? And I, for a long time, was just saying like, nah, I got my own gig and a side thing. And then people started really imploring, going, look, how much do you charge? And I'm like, oh, like, yeah, duh, of course. Like, yeah, you want to exchange money for this. Like, okay, let's do that. So that was a few years ago. And, with kind of, there's never like green lights all kind of aligned at once. But when I got let go from my last company, I was looking around. I'm like, there is no better timing to really go all in on my agency. I was already working nights and weekends on side stuff. Like, this made sense. So in September of this past year, that's when I basically launched fully in, and I haven't looked back. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so how do you educate us? Because a lot of the people that listen to this are doing sales development. So they're getting stuff from marketing and trying to turn it into an appointment, or they're cold calling, right? And they're
Yeah.
trying to put that whole thing together. So educate us. How do you, when you start to work with a client, what kind of information do you get from them? And then how do you determine, the strategy?
Sure. So I think taking even a step just before that is where are the clients going? Like, what is the swim lane? Or I think I've often used the phrase watering hole. Basically, I realize that given, like the
Water.
savannah again.
Okay.
Yeah, think of it like basically if I know that I'm immediately approaching people that I've never met before and going all in over the top selling, I'm not going to make it. They're going to be put off. But if I'm hitting either an existing network of people that go to a website or a forum or a group to find people like me, then it's going to come off way more natural. So that means, are there groups where people go to ask questions about how to sell? Because that to me would be a really nice open invitation to say, well, selling's cool, but how you doing in terms of qualified leads? So if you're selling, I don't know, there's so many different products out there, but if you're selling software as a service, and maybe it's, I don't know, what was one of the companies, hourly shift worker software. So super niche. So I would want to go where people that have hourly jobs congregate and bitch and moan. So that's Reddit, that's Quora, that's in many cases forums that are specific to that industry. But also probably one of the most untapped areas is Facebook groups. People are so active in Facebook groups because it seems genuine. And Facebook continues to punch that not only in your notifications, but in your news feed. So if something new comes out that has a ton of engagement, you get notified on Facebook, and then you go in and actually view it and click on it. So those are kind of the channels that I would say I've been tapping into, but I'm also in a much smaller country. So I've tried LinkedIn automation, I've tried email automation, certainly a ton of different types of content. I mean, you really have to pull every trigger available to you and hit such a broad scope in order to start narrowing down what actually works.
Okay, this is really interesting. So what you're saying is, when you first come in, you go to sort of the end users of the products and try to find out where they congregate and where they're bitching and moaning and complaining about the problems that they have. That's the first place that you start.
Yes.
That's brilliant. Okay, so basically what you're doing is you're going in and you're trying to find out what their main pain points are and what their problems are and the vocabulary that they use and stuff like that.
Yeah, because guess who has the perfect solution to their problem, right?
Yes.
If I'm selling HR tools, I need to be in HR groups waiting for somebody to trigger the right question, which is, isn't there software to do this? By the way, that's what I'm selling, you should check out this tool. And,
okay.
It's not hard to join these. The other way to do it is making fake accounts. So I have, I don't know, between 8 to 10 different fake accounts, and they're all a part of anywhere from 20 to 50 different groups on Facebook. LinkedIn's a waste of time for groups, by the way. They never really get anything going because they don't hit your news feed. But yeah, why wouldn't you do that in terms of being able to hit people?
Yeah, I've always wondered why groups never really took off in LinkedIn, but that's why, because they never show up in your feed.
Yeah, I think people have this really nice idea of oh, cool. I think it happens when people are somewhat new to LinkedIn. Well, they'll join 1 or 2 groups to kind of see what it's all about. But most of the time, it's just sales pitches. I don't see real activity in any of the groups that I've ever been a part of. I'm sure it ebbs and flows, and maybe somebody listening is oh, that's not true. I'm in the sales professionals group, and we're awesome. And it's okay, you found the one group. It's just not a thing, unfortunately. And I could see where it would be valuable, but I haven't gotten anything from it yet. Okay,
so if someone's listening out there, they want to try it. What if they're in their industry is mechanical engineering or something like that, and
yeah,
they're struggling to find the bitch and moan, group, whatever group it is, if it's on Facebook or whatever. I mean, how do you go about finding those groups?
All right. Well, then let's say that let's take LinkedIn, for example. I'm sure that if you look in LinkedIn mechanical engineering, there will be groups that people inadvertently join, not knowing that there was going to be no activity. I would either use Phantom Buster or TextAU. TextAW, I think is what they call it now, which is silly. But yeah, there's basically a script in there that would allow you to run a proxy and then scrape every unique ID from that group, which means you get first name, last name, job title, company, and of course the LinkedIn URL, which either can be enriched to get an email address to blast these people and be like, hey, I know that you're everybody's favorite engineer on LinkedIn. We should totally have a conversation because here's something that I do that you might find interesting. You don't come out selling right away. Or I would put them in a custom audience and just run targeted ads against these people and see what happens.
Okay. And so this could work. So that's from a high level, from a marketing perspective. First, you find them. Then what's your next step? You start to run ads against it, reaching out to them directly. How does that go?
So I always run the same type of sequence, which is target. So figure out exactly like who the buyer is, and is it a bottom up or a top down type of situation. Then I discover their details, their email address, their job title. Then I make sure to enrich. I validate their email so it doesn't get bounced. If it were LinkedIn, I wouldn't have to do that. And then I do sequenced outreach. So if it's let's say that we're just talking about LinkedIn right now. Sequenced outreach means that I'm setting basically an introduction message and then giving a little buffer of time to try to trigger a conversation. Conversations are where people eventually end up getting into phone calls. The conversation doesn't start with, I'm really handsome and I can bench press this amount and I can run a mile in 7 minutes. Will you go home with me? That's not like, it doesn't work at the bar, like unless you're the hot chick, and it certainly doesn't work in business. So you have to warm them up. And some of the best warm-ups are really broad, but also somewhat interesting, where it's like crazy with COVID-19. I saw that you're working at insert company name. How are things going, right? Super open-ended, isn't like a long introduction. They give an answer, and then based on that answer, you can start to pull different triggers that ultimately lead you in 5 steps to, dude, we should totally talk about this. Like, I did what you're doing. I know exactly what you're about. I actually work with people that are super similar to you. Like, are you open to scheduling a quick call? I'd love to do this. And that to me is kind of like the right nature of selling, but you can automate a lot of that. And trying to do this manually is, yeah, it's impossible. Like we were talking earlier, and like there's so many businesses out there that only survive on in-person meetings and networking events, conferences, and that kind of stuff. Like when that's pulled out of the equation, you either have to get a lot smarter really fast, or you're going to struggle. And I see a lot more people in the second group.
It is, and a lot of the SDRs, BDRs, they're tasked with creating that process that you're talking about. So maybe there is no digital marketing person, or there's no agency. They should probably call you
hey,
so that you can work with them.
There you go.
So they have to do it themselves. So back up a little bit. How do you begin to think about the outreach process, and then map it out and then implement it so that you can automate more of it and you don't have to do every single step yourself every time?
I think the way that I've always kind of gotten other people to understand this stuff is it's an iterative process. Like if you've ever seen like those cool videos on YouTube where it's a street vendor that has like super fast hands and like they're putting together like 1,000 little tamales, or they're doing a hot dog really fast or whatever, and they chop up like 20 of them and flip them over the shoulder. Like they've mechanized such an arduous process, because if either one of us were to pick up the same tools, it would be an absolute joke and we would make a mess. But it's because they've done it so many times and they've reduced the amount of pauses, any type of like unnecessary muscle twitch. They've streamlined everything to an art form. And you need to think about your business development like that. Why do I need to write the same stupid email 1,000 times? Why wouldn't I send out a mail merge and use individual merge fields that are basically like unique fields that I can just upload a spreadsheet that has all of these to then begin that dialogue? So I guess this first step is, you need to understand, like, the ultimate goal is I need to get in touch with somebody so they'll respond. Work your way backwards and figure out, cool, if I can reach, instead of a 1-for-1 approach, I want to do 1 for 1,000. I need to write an email that will captivate. I need to get it sent out to 1,000 people. And just for a heads up, only send out 300 of these mail merges at a time. And pick a tool that you can learn from. And there are tons of tools like GMass and Mixmax. Like, those are all kind of like the first order of like understanding and figuring out how these things go. And I think, like both of those have like 30-day trials or something absurd. Once you get a little more, a little more technical on it, there's so many more, like integrated tools that are really interesting and allow you to see a lot more. But you have to start with baby steps. Like, you can't start way down the line, and picking up one tool and realizing, man, that wasn't actually that hard and that saved me time. It's like getting a flashlight in a dark room. You get to go explore.
Got it. So you start with the process and get it mapped out and understand what your end goal is and kind of reverse engineer it. And then you start to plug in some of these tools. Now, if I take it from the flip side, like sometimes you see it on LinkedIn, like people are complaining about the outreach that they get from SDRs. They're like, oh man, I got one of these automated emails, or this wasn't personalized. This person doesn't understand my business. They're just bugging me,
Yeah.
Like, how do you somehow balance that automation with not, spamming people, basically?
So here's an interesting thought. The way that LinkedIn's algorithm works might not be the most intuitive thing. Has anybody, stupid question, like, has anybody gone over the LinkedIn algorithm with you?
I mean, people talk about it, but what are your thoughts?
Like, it's one of those things that, yeah. So like, there's a really interesting play within LinkedIn where it goes through an approval process before you actually rank. And so the way that it normally works, I have slides for this. I'd love to actually do like a webinar with you to make sure that it was highly visual. But basically, first you put out a status, and the status gets a little bit of traction, which is the initial indicator. So like that first hour that a status goes live, if you get, I think it's like upwards of 30 to 50 engagements, whether it's the see more button or a comment or a like or even a share, it means that you've passed kind of level 1 of like, is this a good post? So the next level is then, all right, beyond 1 hour, if this continues to grow, what should we do about this? And it means that there's actually somebody at LinkedIn that is reviewing statuses to see, is this a super pretty girl with a low-cut blouse that's saying, oh, can't wait for my first day? There's a reason that they're pulling those down. But if it's a status going, yeah, fucking spam and I'm a bitch because I can't handle somebody sending me a message on LinkedIn, like, are you kidding me? Those messages go viral all the time. And it's because LinkedIn controls the reach of these things. So there's no reason.
So LinkedIn wants to promote, I mean, I'm extrapolating here, but LinkedIn wants to promote people complaining about spam because they're an engine to, facilitate sales communication. Or am I way off base?
That's the ticket. I mean,
that might be a little much. Okay, go on. I interrupted.
So,
go on.
So like the idea is that, yes, that does exist, but also like there's a really interesting like write-up by this guy, Jonah Berger, that it's called the Steps, STEPPS, to virality. And one of the bigger P's in there is public. And that means things that we have all engaged in or have seen that might slightly annoy us, that we can kind of come together and relate to. So like, I mean, we're all used to having a really poorly worded initial like connection. You're like, all right, fine, fuck it. And then an immediate like, hey, do you want to buy my development services? It's like, get the fuck out of my ear. So like there's
services, leads generation. It's just off the hook, which is hilarious. Okay, but go on. Yeah. So you get those.
Yeah.
And
so you do get those.
This. Yeah.
Right. And so like, of course there is a knee-jerk reaction or a triggering effect because Yeah, when we do see that, we recognize and it's familiar, and of course we relate. But the other side of it that we have to realize is sometimes a salesman comes a knocking, and sometimes he answers the door. So I've definitely been in situations where I've been cold outreached, open the message, and I'm like, all right, well, I mean, I actually could use this service. Like timing is often everything, but there wouldn't be a reason for spam if people never clicked and never engaged and never actually bought. So there
100%.
is a reason for it.
So timing, let's talk about timing. How do you crack that code? Because I'm the same way. Like when 3 months ago, all live conferences were closed and I had to quickly figure out how to go virtual. And if somebody at that time would have reached out and been like, hey, I've got the perfect solution for this going from live to virtual, I probably would have taken that call. Like if they reached out and they wanted to do software development or lead generation, then that's spam, right? So how do you crack that timing nut?
Yeah, so there's kind of a indirect way of hitting this, and it always kind of boils down to either that spark moment, which is so difficult to find, especially if it's like a B2B product. Like you're really struggling to hit spark moment where it's like, aha, I need this product. I think often with a lot of digital products, software as a service, SaaS, you end up having to do a bit of education before they fully comprehend exactly what your product does, which most people kind of miss that step. So you have to figure
education. Okay.
Sort of, yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So what is one order of magnitude away from that solution that can be searched for via intent? So like I'll provide an example. So like my last company, I don't care, Valuer.ai, and don't go there, they're scumbags. I'm recorded saying that. Edit undo.
That's okay.
Yeah, in any event, I wrote this article that was basically 50 examples of corporations that failed to innovate. Now, the reason for writing this article is that we supplied startups to larger corporates that were interested in the, like buzzword of innovation. The reality is the reason or the consequence for not innovating was that you would be a failure as a company. So I wrote this piece in order to grab people that were concerned or fearful of what happens when you don't use my product. And so what ended up happening was, this one blog post, albeit it's a very long one, garnered more than 80% of our traffic for the better part of a year because it was the perfect set of keywords. It was the perfect intent, which is I might be searching for why a big company would fail because I don't fully understand or appreciate how somebody could innovate at a large company. And so if we can think about that within our own organization or just think about how people search. So if I'm looking for the capital of Denmark, then I don't really need to go to a website for that. You'll get hit with an answer snippet. But if I'm looking for apartments in Denmark, it means there's a high likelihood that I'm not just browsing because I'm bored, but I probably either want to buy one or I want to rent one. So if I can put together something in the way of content that allows me to search or be found via an ad while I'm searching, then that's kind of the name of the game right now. So we're looking for people's either subconscious intentions or direct intentions, which you kind of have to play around a little bit with it, and it's not always going to work, but that's how I've played the game.
And it's kind of going back to your first point about the groups and trying to find what people are thinking about. How do you start to triangulate what those might be that the people are concerned about? Is it starting by going back to the groups and getting involved in their community and trying to figure out what people are complaining about?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. So I think often it comes in a couple of different forms. So like one is just, complaining, and they're looking for a community to kind of alleviate some of their anxiety of isn't this frustrating? But often it's there to actually get value. So I definitely think that within Facebook, people love to see little case studies of here's how I generated X amount of revenue using X solution or using this sales process. People love that. If it's what are the best tools for X, I would go on to Quora and see if I could find via search, Quora is Quora, what are the questions being asked that are either around my software as a solution, my product, whatever the case is, my industry, provide something in the way of a meaningful answer, and always link to either your LinkedIn, or I would say your company website would be the way to go. You need to provide you as a product or service as the answer to all of their questions. The other way of doing this is kind of some shady shit, but I love doing it. Take the most popular posts from other groups that are related to that industry and basically copy that and paste it in a different group where there are no people from that original group. Wait until the comments reach to be about 80%, 80 total comments, and usually like 100 likes. And then edit that new post and put in a link to a blog or your website or your lead funnel, whatever, landing page, and then save. And what you've essentially done is boosted a ton of engagement for a post that no longer represents what it was before, but it's loosely related. And thus you can continue to push it to the very top of the group by commenting on the other comments that are below, thus kind of hijacking groups.
You got it here. So now you now you're becoming like a mini marketer, right? I mean, like it's funny because for the SDRs, the sort of conventional wisdom is like just pound the phones, just call people, talk to them, get them to set up a meeting, And I think some of the smarter, what's that?
I said, who's that for? Call the people who said no yesterday and talk to them again.
I know it's a very, because I think like a lot of the sales leaders now came up in the era where you could do that, but they haven't gotten hip to like what you just said. I mean, doing stuff like that, it's like there's a push and pull because, they don't want SDRs necessarily to become mini marketers, but it's kind of what you have to do these days in order to get engaged in conversations with people.
I agree. I think it's unfortunate because there is that old adage of like, everybody's got to be a salesman. You got to sell yourself. I think we've all heard that
Beat
before.
The phones, make 100 phone calls every day. I mean,
coffees for closers.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, it's there's a lot of confusion out there because it's like, wait a minute, like one guy on YouTube is telling me to make 100 calls a day. And then now this guy, Taylor, is telling me to, reverse engineer blog posts. And now the next guy, and it's like, what the hell am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there. I totally get it. It depends on the product or service. If you're selling insurance and it's a numbers game, like I feel really rough for you. And hey, I've been there. I did for-profit education sales. Scumbags. Well, they know they're scumbags.
I did
Ashford
that.
University. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, way back in the day, dude. I was like...
Double guns. I would high-five you right now.
After that shit.
I love that. Yes, David,
man.
you're awesome.
All those things went out of business. I mean, they got busted by the feds, right? Because they were
scam.
They were a total scam. But I think that being said, okay, I've always both sides. That people could go through, get a good education, get a good job. It was good, but there was a lot of shady practices happening with those.
Yeah.
But anyways,
well,
you were contextualizing when to use phone calls and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, have you ever been in like a job that like, I'm sure exactly with like the cold calling of these for-profit universities, and then maybe you go into a place that actually is genuine and has a real product, like, and you're like, oh shit, like this is what it's like to have a real job now.
Yeah.
And and like, it's crazy. Like, the hell was I doing back there? Like, fighting tooth and nail on a pirate ship. Like, it was crazy, and so you realize like, if I'm learning at a level where I feel like, yeah, I could use some of this like tooth and nail kind of garbage, hard selling, fast talking on the phone in order to get, I don't know, a couple of bucks for every appointment that's set or every deal that's closed. Like, you got to get the fuck out of there because that's not scalable in terms of the stuff that you're going to learn as a human being that wants to grow. So if you're selling something that you don't believe in, like that's already like heads up, like you're not in a great place. But the reality is people should want the product that you're selling. And if you're having to really fight for every single deal, there are easier ways to live. Like there's plenty of products out there that do this for you. And I would say that, like Yeah, like the sales guys that I always had like a chip on my shoulder were the folks from like Deloitte, KPMG, Booz Allen, Northrop Grumman. It's like, cool, dude. So you get to sell like the fucking F-15s and like the Joint Strike Fighters, like that's an awesome fucking job. And I guarantee you that guy didn't sit around cold calling a bunch of homeless people that just got their phone reactivated to see if they wanted to go back to school. So like at some point, you know what I'm saying, David? I'm just saying, and
100%.
no offense to anybody that's actually in that job, but dude, you have to fucking escalate beyond that. Like you're not going to learn anything there. And it's not going to teach you how to be a better person. It's just going to teach you how to get frustrated going to work.
Okay.
So
if someone's out there listening to this and they're in one of those jobs, what you're saying is take a hard look in the mirror and just make sure that this is for you. And right. I mean, there's better ways to live than what we're describing here. Is that correct?
For the most part, yes. The caveat on that is that every salesperson in the history of sales, for the most part, has had to do a little bit of side hustle in order to get the leads in order to make sure that they were qualified. You're never going to have, I can't say never. There's very few instances where you're having just a deluge of leads. There's an endless amount, and you get to cherry pick like the best. Like people are begging to hand over the credit card. That's so rare. And I'm sure it happens, but it's rare. And normally if you find something in between where, you're getting a couple of good ones, but using your own network, using a little bit of this kind of razzle dazzle and some of the techniques that I've described, like that's going to help. And it also alleviates some of the monotony of just kind of rotating every single call. It's the same thing. Like you should be able to kind of move back and forth and discover like, cool, through the way that I answered this question, the amount of people that were talking about this, maybe I should talk about more of this in my pitch. Like these are different things that you get from doing both. And I think you should look at it as an exciting way to differentiate the day, not necessarily something that's just part of the slog. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. I mean, and a lot of people look at this as like, this is where I cut my teeth, in the industry. I learn a ton, I learn what works, what doesn't. And then the skills that they learn are totally transferable. I was saying before we got on this, I was doing SDR work 5 minutes before we started the podcast. I mean, you never end. I mean, even if you run your own business or you're in marketing or other sales positions, I mean, you learn a ton from that position. So, but
yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Taylor, this has been amazing, dude. I think it's inspiring to people what you've done and what you've been able to create. I definitely want to make sure that people can hook up and connect with you. Do they go to your website? What's the best way to connect after the show?
Sure. So I think there's one other Taylor Ryan in Copenhagen, Denmark. So
okay.
So if you look me up, Taylor Ryan, I'm the one who's running Clint Marketing and Architecture Quote. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always open and looking for new, interesting clients that want to drive a lot of leads and also kind of hit other areas. I don't only want to do lead gen, pure SEM or pure LinkedIn outreach. I think it's a full spectrum of this stuff. And ultimately, lead gen is a lot of short term. I think long term, you eventually want people coming into you. And that's more inbound and it takes time. But yeah, Clint Marketing is the agency, and happy to connect with everybody. And thank you, David, for giving me a chance. Like, I feel like I've been bitching a lot and just like frustrated. So I hope it didn't come off as like pure like anger, but yeah.
No, we got some great tips here. And I do want to do that webinar on, LinkedIn and the tips and tricks that you needed a visual for. So let's arrange that for later in the year and make sure that we can get that going as well.
Totally.
Taylor, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your wisdom. Great conversation, and I appreciate you supporting the sales development community, man.
Thanks again for having me. This was fun. Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Development Podcast, the only audio forum 100% focused and dedicated to sales development, with your host, David Delaney. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube and take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes. Your support makes our show possible. If you are struggling with your sales development program, contact us at tenbound.com for a no-obligation exploratory call. Again, that's tenbound.com.